Hello and welcome to Tech Talks with Madonna, Season 2, Episode 2. Our guest today is Sumayyah. Sumayyah is a senior software engineer at Square and a regular conference speaker. She's been developing Android apps for over 10 years, and she's worked in early stage startups as well as large companies and built apps in all kinds of spaces. For instance, social media, video streaming, smart home integrations, and finance. Sumayyah's second love is community engagement, so you'll also find her on stage at conferences, writing on her blog, or mentoring one-on-one. When she's not working on Android things, you'll find her very likely at home, despairing at all, reading, gardening, crafting, and much more. Sumayyah will be talking about interviewing tips, tricks that worked for her, and how she got over 10 offers in 1 year. So do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I am Sumayyah Ahmed. I met Madonna at DroidCon this year, where I'm a frequent speaker. I'm actually an Android developer at Square, and I have been making Android apps for 9.5 years.
Wow.
So next summer is going to be a full decade of Android development.
That is amazing, a full decade. I mean, I started back in 2014, but not professionally. But I can imagine having a decade. That's pretty cool. Congrats on that. Now, sorry, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say thank you. That's
You're
it.
welcome. Now, cool. What got you interested in Android engineering?
I actually had a very strange path to Android engineering. I did a computer science degree at the University of California, and to be frank, I got my butt kicked because I was not exposed to programming at all until I got to the undergraduate level. And I switched into computer science from math because I hated doing proofs. And immediately I realized I had no idea how to program. I didn't know what compilers were or terminals or anything like that. So something about it kept me going. I don't know what. And I finished the CS degree, and then I thought, okay, well, now what? Obviously, the answer was to get a job. And because I was struggling quite a bit with the data structures and algorithm style of interviewing, that was very popular back then. And this is, I can talk a lot about this. But one of my professors offered me a summer job creating an Android app. It was for, I believe it was to create a travel app that would show your carbon offset for each route that you're taking. And I went into the summer knowing nothing about Android engineering. I learned off of YouTube and some random blog posts, and I made this app, and then I just fell in love with it. The way I hadn't fallen in love with the C++ programming or the database programming I did in school. When you feel that little ping in your heart that's like, I want to do this, I want to do more of this. That's what I felt when I made that Android app.
Well, I think that actually resonates with me.
Isn't it funny that we had the same entry point because I also picked Android because I knew Java. That actually has helped so many people get into Android development because Java is such a popular language. And it was, now of course we have Kotlin, but it was such an easy transition back then from learning Java to doing Android development.
That is very true. I like that. Now, this year we've seen so many layoffs, right? And one thing that I know, ended up getting 10 offers in a year, and now your dream job, I would call it.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be so much stuff because I have so much stuff to say about this.
Nice.
But let me ask you, should we talk about the sabbatical part first?
Yes, let's talk about the sabbatical part first, and then now we can talk about the 10 offers. Yeah.
All right, let's do this. So in 2021, I was coming off the heels of a pandemic, of course, which meant that everything went upside down. And I got a lot of reactions all the way from, that's amazing, you're going to love it, to, oh my God, I could never, So there was a whole spectrum of reactions there, which was very interesting. But what I found when I took that year off was it has been amazing. It has been one of the most transformative years of my adult life, not just personally, but also professionally. For the first time in 8 years, I actually stopped working full time. And I sat back and I thought about, what is the kind of work that I love? What's the kind of work I want to keep doing?
Yeah.
And that was the year I really started talking about Android development. And surprise, it actually propelled my public speaking career quite a bit because during the time I was on sabbatical, I think I did something like 7 conference talks.
Wow.
I had the time finally to start talking about what I was passionate about, to start talking to other people, to start networking. And taking the break from the day-to-day, from the full-time job, it gave my mind a space to breathe and a space to be curious and reach out to people. Wow. So that was a sabbatical. It was a great experience. I have absolutely no regrets.
Yeah.
But then it came time to start looking for a job again. I had planned to take a year off. Yes. And this is the irony. The entire time that I was off of work, it was a crazy hiring market. Yeah. Every company was hire, hire, hire. I was getting bombarded with recruiter calls and emails. Yeah. I was watching all my ex-colleagues and friends sign these massive new offers. Oh, yeah. And look, I'm not going to lie. There was quite a bit of, fear of missing out right there.
Yes.
So I came into the job market in summer of 2021, in the tail summer of 2021, and I started, casually doing a few interviews, and then the stock market tanked, and then I started hearing, oh my God, I'm so sorry. We had openings earlier in the year, but we don't have as many now, or we're going through a hiring freeze, call back later. And this alarmed me. Yeah. It was kind of a stressful situation to be going into interviews with, but I was determined. I needed a job. I needed to get on with it. So I got on with it. Yeah. And I did a smattering of interviews early on just to feel out what the Android market was like. And I realized, oh my gosh, I need to prepare for this because at a senior level interview, you are expected to be an Android expert. You need to be able to talk fluently about complex Android things like multi-threading. You need to be really good at coding, data structures and algorithms. You need to be coding right off the bat with those things. That takes practice. I needed to brush up on a lot of the projects that I had done more than a year ago and remember details, figure out how I was going to tell stories out of all of those things. So there's multiple things you need to be good at, not to mention system design. So I realized this is going to be something that takes preparation. And that's when I jumped into my preparation phase.
Wow, that is so great that you walked us through your sabbatical, to how you experienced the layoff period, to how you actually ended up preparing. And one thing that really amazes me, about your path or your ambitions is that you didn't give up. You were in it because I think it's passion for you, right? I'm filling up that for you, but it feels like you were very passionate about Android.
Yes. And what happened, actually, what the job market had changed in the whole year that I was off. Because of COVID, we actually now have access to a lot more jobs than we would have prior because of remote work. And that actually sparked something in me. I was like, I need to explore what's out there. I need to see which companies are out there, what type of projects are there, because I don't live in New York. I don't live in San Francisco. I don't have access to hundreds of tech companies right away. The only way I would have had access to this is remote work. So that actually, having that propelled me forward. It kept me motivated. It kept me positive. And even though the grind of preparation, it was absolutely a grind. And do you want me to dig deep into this? Because we can definitely do that.
We're definitely going next to that question. It's the next list. Yeah. Now, the second question that I had for you, I know I'll ask you this question definitely at the end, like how do you stand out in a pool of incredible talent? But first I wanted to ask you, what are the tips and tricks to assessing a technical interview mostly? You got 10 offers, which is super great. So please tell us, what are your tips and tricks?
The thing that made the biggest difference for me, honestly, was getting to the interview phase. And that was through referrals. Having referrals really changed the game because you're putting your resume into an automated system. You may get replies 2 or 3 months later. Honestly, I'm still getting automated replies from, these systems now from something I applied to 6 months ago. It can be the difference between, getting to an interview or getting, rejected right off the bat. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I applied to a company online and I got their, automated rejection email. Sorry, you don't qualify for this. And then I asked one of my contacts in that company to give me a referral. Boom, I got an interview for that same position.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Having those referrals was amazing. It got me interviews and it got me to interviews fast. It didn't, make of course, once you get to the interview stage, it's all up to you and how you perform. But having that person on the inside, getting you to the recruiter, getting you in front of the hiring manager was amazing. And it made a huge difference in having the ability to line up all these interviews. I think I interviewed with 19 companies and a lot of them I got through referrals.
Amazing. Now, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, the second question that I had for you is how do you prepare for a behavioral interview? Because I know that's part of an interview process too. Because that's also us. And I think many people do sometimes say they fail on that section too. Do you mind telling us how you prepare for that?
Absolutely. I actually talked to quite a lot of senior level and staff level engineers. And one thing that they told me quite consistently was tell a story. Figure out how to tell the story of your project. So typically in a behavioral interview, you're going to get questions like, tell me about a time when, and it could be, tell me about a time when you failed on a project, or a time when a project went off the rails. What did you do to save it? And this is honestly, it's a very tough section because first of all, it's possible that you don't have a story that matches this question exactly. And then you're trying to scramble and think of an incident ahead of time, and then you're trying to explain to the interviewer who has no context around what your decision-making strategy was or the type of work that you were doing. So practicing these and preparing these ahead of time helped hugely. So I went and I looked through all of my old notes. I'm a note taker, so for the 5 years I was at Comcast, I kept detailed notes of every project and issue that I had worked on. I went back and looked at all of these and pulled out 3 or 4 stories that would hold up to 20 to 30 minutes of questioning. You have to be able to go really deep into this. They can't be like, oh, here's how I fixed a bug. It's ideally a longer, complex project with multiple people involved. And then the second part is once you know what you're going to talk about, you have to learn how to create a narrative around it. And a lot of people tell you to use the STAR format: situation, task, action, results. What I found that was very helpful in structuring the way I would tell the story. I also learned about something called man in the hole storytelling, where you imagine yourself as this person in the hole, they're in trouble, and you have to explain how you climbed out of it. So it's like the classic triangle of a story plot. And this helps because it creates a compelling narrative. It makes your story interesting, and it also clearly focuses on what the problem is, what you did, how did you solve it. I also found that having a back and forth with the interviewer helped. So I would say something like, I don't have a story that matches your question exactly, but I do have a story about how I fixed an issue that was driving our project off the rails. Do you want to hear about that? So you can suggest alternatives. If they say yes, I would dive in and say start with scoping out the problem, give them context. So I was in a team of 6 people. Our task was to deliver 1 module out of 20 on a timeline of 6 months. That's context. That tells them exactly where the problem was, how many people you impacted, how big or how complicated this problem was, and then you can move into the next step.
Nice.
I'm going to talk about. Tell them what you're going to tell them ahead of time. Give them a quick summary and then ask them where you want them to dive in. Do you want me to talk about the people side of this? Do you want me to talk about the technical side of this? And engage them in conversation. Ask them what they want to hear from you. It's very easy to launch into a 20-minute story and then surface, and the interviewer is like, yeah, but can we rewind back to this part? I actually want to hear more about this. Wow. So this was a skill set that I had to develop, and
it is a skill set when you think about it.
Right? Because we're not storytellers. We don't talk a lot. We're not up giving presentations all the time. We are quiet people. Engineers are quiet people.
That is very true. Trying to solve the problems in the back end. That is so true. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned amazing stuff. I'm wondering, what are your best resources when preparing for an interview, or where can people find some great resources?
Oh my goodness. The resources question is an important one because the problem is there's too much of it, right?
Yes.
Google, like if you just Google software engineering interview or lead code interview prep, you get thousands of results. And lead code itself has got 10,000 questions.
Yeah.
This is the problem I ran into when I started preparing because it was too much. It's just too much to absorb. You don't know what's important. You don't know what to practice. So the problem actually is finding out how to get to the exact resource you need.
Yeah.
One thing I found was scope your searches to the exact role and the level that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out, I want to look for Android prep material specifically at this company, specifically for this level. So senior level or like an L4 or an L5 at this company, interview materials for that position because that really narrowed it down for me.
Yeah.
And it helped me prepare. So that's a technique I used when Google searching. Another thing that really helped was reaching out to my personal network or my Android community people and just asking for help and saying, hey, I'm about to start talking to these particular companies. Has anybody been on interviews before? What are your tips? What should I study? What should I focus on? A lot of engineers do have blogs about the interviewing processes they went through. And if you look for Android people, they usually have information scoped exactly to what you need.
Yes.
So finding those resources helped. I will say that in the end, two things really helped. One was Algo Monster, and I really hesitate to recommend a paid service because not everybody has the resources to pay for prep, right? Especially when there's so much free material. The reason it worked for me is because I had a limited time frame. I was preparing for an hour a day, and it has a very structured and focused course on specifically data structures and algorithms, which is the part that I was weakest in. So I think I paid like $100 for a 1-year subscription to Algo Monster, and it did help.
Amazing, because I'm going to take notes on that too. Algo Monster. Cool. Yeah. Now, thank you so much for sharing that. I do have a follow-up question on the Android part, and I'm wondering what's the difference between an Android interview process versus a generic software engineering interview?
It honestly depends on the company. A lot of companies just didn't give me Android questions at all. So it really helps to talk to the recruiter ahead of time and ask them, do you have a generic interview process for all engineers, or is there an Android specific interview process? Yeah. Some companies do 100% Android. Most of them will do a mixture of data structures and algorithms and Android questions. Yeah. So the Android part of it can be of several types. The most common one was just verbal questions. So during a coding round. So in your typical engineering coding round where you have, let's say, 30 minutes to go through a live coding exercise, the interviewer would typically save 15 minutes at the end to do a quick round of Android questions. So they would zip through, can you tell me about how coroutines work on Android or something like that? So that was the most common one. They just sort of squeezed in Android questions while after your coding is done. A lot of other companies are doing things like take-home projects where they give you specs for a simple Android app and they ask you to code it. These are also a little tricky because the companies will often say, we want you to only spend 4 to 5 hours on this. And I found this to be very, very, let me say, optimistic. Yeah. I definitely spent more than 5 hours on a lot of them. And this was even with copy pasting code from other projects.
And then when Android doesn't work.
Right. The first hour is just setting up Android Studio and your Gradle builds. That's like the whole hour and a half gone, probably.
So true.
Yeah. And I think that it really varies, because some companies definitely might ding you for saying, hey, you didn't add unit tests.
Yeah.
And you may want to tell them, like, you said 5 hours and I did 5 hours. I couldn't fit in unit tests in 5 hours. So yeah, your mileage may vary on this one, but typically the Android take-home project is usually simple. There's probably a list view. There's probably a couple of fragment views.
Yeah.
And it's usually basic Android stuff. So most of the time, if you want to impress them, you can go all out, but just basic Android basics is where it's at. So that's your take-home project. And then some companies also do Android live coding. So instead of opening up your HackerRank IDE or CodeSignal IDE, these are like online code editors where you typically get to collab with your interviewer. You would just screen share in Android Studio. They would give you a project, and you do things like adding a feature in front of them or debugging in front of them. So these are the two most common flavors of Android live coding. So it honestly varies so much, because it's very, very new for companies to have Android-specific interview processes. And out of the 19 companies that I went through, only 3 of them had 100% Android.
Wow.
Yeah. The other,
good to know.
Yeah, the other ones always had some sort of leak code, data structures, algorithms question thrown in there as well.
Wow. Now, let's talk about the sad part, which is, let's say you've been rejected. How do you bounce back from a bad or failed interview? Because I feel like 19, like you mentioned, 19, and you got 10 offers. I mean, that's pretty impressive. But sometimes people don't get an offer at all from the 19. So how do you bounce back?
That's a great question. And I have gotten rejected throughout this process multiple times. I've gotten down-leveled multiple times. And it's very difficult. It helped to approach the because what actually makes it much more difficult is because your feelings get involved in this. It emotionally feels often that this company is telling you, oh, you're not good enough, like you thought you were senior level, you're not. And I had to reframe this in my mind to say, this interviews are a business experience. You and this company are interviewing each other to figure out, can we come to terms with a contract for employment? So thinking of it as just business helped. This is not a referendum on me or my skills or my ability as an engineer or my worth as a person. It honestly, it can be really crushing, especially when you think you've done well and the company says, sorry, no, you didn't. Another thing that helped was at the end of this, at the end of all these 19 companies, I realized that this process is very arbitrary. We think that it's going to be a strict but fair process, and everybody's going to evaluate you correctly, or and they're going to spend a lot of time, and it's going to be in a consistent fashion. No, it's not. Even with companies that have strong hiring cultures, strong hiring processes, it's very difficult for them to be consistent. So one person that may get an offer, you may not, and it could be for completely arbitrary reasons. So it helps to remember that there's so much of luck and opportunity and timing in the interviewing process as well. Maybe they're looking for a particular specialist and you just don't fit that type. Maybe you had an off day and it happens. Yeah, it does. I have to say, I completely flunked an Android bug finder round, and it was all simple bugs of the type that I had been solving for years and years, and I just couldn't do it. It just happened. It was just an off day. So mentally reframing the interview itself, keeping in mind the fact that interviews can be very, very arbitrary, really helps deal with the feelings of rejection and dejection that come with that come with, companies turning you down.
Yeah.
Another way to turn this around is to ask for mock interviews. So reach out to, again, a personal network or connections, and run through a mock interview with them, because they will give you feedback. Companies sometimes don't bother about giving you feedback. They give you very generic feedback. Mock interviews can help pinpoint what the problem is. Are you not communicating clearly? Are you good at coding, but you're just not good at system design? That sort of thing.
Wow. I'm just blown away by your information and knowledge sharing, and thank you so much for sharing with us, and I'm pretty appreciative for that. Now I have one more last question, and that is, I wanted to ask you, now that you talked about the company, I feel like we've touched on so many great content, and all this content will actually be available on our Substack. I think you'll write an article on that, which is going to be super awesome. And I wanted to ask you, the final question is, how can you evaluate the company or team that's interviewing you? Because I feel like it's always important too, we also look into that. So how do you evaluate that?
That is great, because I see that a lot of online materials leave this out. It is just as important for you to evaluate this company as it is the reverse. That mindset makes a big difference in communication style, actually. It gives you confidence. It gives you much more projection of competency. And both of these things come through in your interviews. Your confidence is going to help you carry that interview through. So thinking about your interviewer as a conversation partner, they're going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask them questions. And when it comes to that, ask the questions. Take the time to ask questions. Do the research into the company beforehand or the team beforehand. Ask around to find out what you can, and use that research to base questions off of. Ask about anything that's important to you. Things like, what's your team culture? What are your team processes? How are you going to help me grow in my role? How are you going to get me promoted? Or things like, what parts of the code base need work right now? All these things. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions. Things like, what would you fix about your code base or your culture? And take advantage of the time that every interviewer has to give you. It's also completely possible to ask your recruiter to set up extra meetings for you. And these could be meetings with a hiring manager, another engineer at the level you're interviewing for. And I love that one, because you can ask them questions about the day-to-day. Things like, how many meetings are you part of? How much time do you spend coding versus mentoring other people, if these are things that are important to you? So investing that time really does pay off. Unfortunately, interviews take a lot of time. It's a huge investment of time and effort.
It's not easy.
It is not easy.
And it's always heartbreaking to, I mean, I really appreciate what you shared, because I feel like my strategy has always been the same. Like, apply to a few companies. Like, I always apply for, let's say, 4, the top ones, based on the culture and everything that they say they do. And then on the 5, I just wait to hear back. And when you mentioned the referrals, I really like that, because that's what I've been utilizing too, referrals. And they work. Because you don't have to wait in line. So I think we will also write more on how people can get referrals, because I can also share my thoughts on that. Because I feel like sometimes if referrals don't work, if you don't know somebody working there, you can find somebody through LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely.
And try to see if they can refer you from LinkedIn. And
I love it. Referrals are so important, because there was one instance where I was in the process of interviewing at a company, and the recruiter was very unsure about me. I had a person in that company who had referred me, who was my cheerleader on the inside, who kept poking the interviewer. Have you scheduled the next round? Like, have you scheduled the on-site for Sumayyah? Can you get things moving along for her? And without that person, I probably would not have, had my on-site scheduled with that company. And of course, this varies. Sometimes referrals can't do as much. Your referrers may just be able to get you the interview, but that in itself is the hardest step. Getting that interview on the calendar is the hardest step. And if you don't have these people in your network, I it's completely possible to reach out to people on LinkedIn or other communities and say something like, hey, I know you work for this company. I'm interested in getting a referral. Can I have an hour of conversation with you? No pressure. But if at the end of that hour, like, let me introduce myself, and if you feel you can refer me, I would be very grateful. That works. You can ask people to refer you without having this deep or personal relationship ahead of time.
That is true. Well, thank you so much for being with us. 30 great minutes of great content. I really appreciate that. And I know many people are looking for jobs because it's around the year where people start jumping hoops. So I know this is going to be very helpful. So you can listen to our podcast and subscribe to our newsletter where you can read about this particular interview session. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madonna.
Don't go. I'm just going to stop recording.